The Epstein files have been released and then further released and then further released. The latest edition that we've received unpacks a ton. But here's the deal. Ain't nobody got time for that. It is tons and tons and tons of pages. So what we're going to do in today's episode is break down for you very clearly, very thoroughly, the top 3 takeaways from the latest revelations of the Epstein files. The first one that you need to be aware of, probably the reason why you clicked on this video, is this. Jeffrey Epstein very well may possibly still be alive. There's plenty of people who've talked about this without much proof, and it seems to be completely unhinged. It seems to be absolutely ridiculous. We would not lay this out in the episode today if we did not think that there's some validity. We are not saying guaranteed that Jeffrey Epstein definitively is still alive. Nobody at this point can say that, or the few people who may be able to say that won't say it. All right, so we're not making a definitive claim, but we're going to lay out for you the evidence that seems to at least make this theory quite possible. The second thing that we're going to be addressing is that Jeffrey Epstein was absolutely pro-Trump, and he was advising and consulting and working with both Trump's campaign in his first administration and the administration itself via Steve Bannon and others as well. See, a lot of guys, if we're honest, myself, I've been a lifelong, in my adult life, GOP voter. And the temptation is right there to say Jeffrey Epstein, pedophile, bad, evil, wicked, all those things I agree with, just for the record, and therefore Democrat, right? Everybody who's kind of a lifelong conservative, we all have this instinct that we can't help deep down inside. We want to make this a left versus right situation, a Democrat versus Republican situation. So the second big revelation that's been buried that a lot of people will not admit, and we're going to lay it out for you and show how this one is definitively proven. This one is a guarantee. This is not, as much as I wish it was, this is not a left versus right issue. This is not Democrat versus Republican issue. Jeffrey Epstein, he worked with Democrats, but he also worked with Republicans. He was well connected with anybody who had power. This is not left versus right. This is elites versus the plebes, right? This is Jews, let's call it what it is, versus the Goyim. And that's our third revelation that we're going to be addressing in this episode, is that Epstein and his closest colleagues and the most powerful allies he had saw their struggles as predominantly not being left versus right or right versus left. It wasn't Democrat and GOP. It wasn't conservatives versus liberals. It was Jews versus the world. It was a civilizational struggle, and it was, in many cases, we just have to be honest about this, it was not political as much as it was racial and religious. Racial and religious. Jews versus Gentiles, Talmudic Judaism versus Christianity versus the Bible. It's, guys, it's the Antichrist versus Christ. That's the battle. It's always been the battle. And the reality is that historically, at least recent history over the past several decades, the GOP, in terms of political parties, has aligned more. It's always had problems. But it has been at least more closely aligned to Team Christ is King, Jesus, Christianity, than the Democrat Party. But a lot of that is starting to fade away. And I think because you could just assume for so long that the GOP was more in line on the cultural issues, the familial issues, the traditional issues, being against abortion, at least generally, being against same-sex marriage, at least generally, because that was the case for so long, we could say, well, I'm on team, not GOP, I'm on team Jesus. But Team Jesus, as it pertains to my voting patterns, means that 99 out of 100 times I'm going to vote GOP, not because they're perfect, not because the Republican Party is synonymous with Jesus, with Christianity, but it's at least closer. And what we all have to realize, one of the big takeaways from this latest rendition of the Epstein files is this: it's no longer GOP versus Democrats. It's no longer the right versus the left. It's what it's actually always been underneath the surface, which is Christ versus the Antichrist. It's Christians versus everybody else. And with that everybody else at the top, the elites influencing everybody else against the Christians, many of them are Jews. And Epstein proves this point. So top 3 takeaways from the latest revelations of the Epstein files, again, are as follows. If this is what you're looking for, you are in the right video, in the right place. Number 1, Jeffrey Epstein very possibly may still be alive. If so, we think we know where he is, and we have some evidence that may prove this as a fact. Number 2, the battle was not GOP versus Democrats. Jeffrey Epstein was an avid Trump supporter, and he was influencing the Trump administration through Steve Bannon and others. And number 3, the real dividing lines was not political, but it was predominantly civilizational, religious, and racial. Judaism versus Christianity, Jews versus the Goyim, Israel versus the world. That's our episode. Slam the subscribe button on YouTube, subscribe on Rumble, follow us on X. My X account, where all these things are posted, is @JoelWebbin. Make sure to give us a follow. Make sure you subscribe. Click the bell so you'll be notified with new content. And without further ado, let's jump into the show. This episode is brought to you by our premier sponsors, Golden Crest, Knick-Knack, and Saga Metals. Here in the United States of America, we believe that we're blessed in this nation with an abundance of resources, and that it's our God-given duty to exercise wise stewardship over them for the flourishing of our people, but also the security of our homeland. See, some of our viewers, you might remember when we first featured a sponsor called Saga Metals. And since that spotlight, shares for Saga have surged by over 130%. Now, the results are in, and they're the strongest to date. On January 2nd, Saga released drill results from their flagship Radar Titanium project. The market reacted immediately, sending the stock flying up over 17% in a single day. Saga Metals is publicly traded here in the U.S. under the ticker SAGMF. And if you're in Canada, it trades under the ticker Saga, SAGA. Strategic government focus, multiple high-potential projects, and a team pushing forward relentlessly through the winter, Saga Metals is now moving full steam ahead. If you want to learn more about this critical mineral story, then you can check out the link in our description below. A special thanks to Saga Metals for making today's video possible.
Radical Christian nationalist pastor, Joel Webbin.
Joel Webbin? I'm going to talk about Joel Webbin today.
Joel Webbin has been excellent.
All right, here we are in the studio. We are live. Top 3 takeaways from the latest revelations with the Epstein files. And we are very blessed to have Harrison Smith live in person in the studio. Harrison, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've got your own show that you got to do today. So we've got you for maybe a couple hours and then you got to get going. What do you have on the docket for today? What are you doing on your show?
I do the War Room each and every weekday, 3 to 6 p.m. InfoWars.com, band.video. And, the day's news, videos, phone calls. Not sure if we have a guest today, but yeah.
What are you hitting today? What topics?
It'll probably be Epstein. It'll probably be a hell of a lot of Epstein if I had to guess. I've also been spending a lot of time on Europe and the UK and the way that they are just committing
suicide.
Yeah, they're essentially.
You can say it.
Okay, I wasn't sure. We're on YouTube. Yeah, it's very weird. I gotta like vector.
YouTube will dock us a little bit, but at the same time, it's like if it's true, like we don't want to go out of our way, but it's like no, Europe is committing suicide, and that's what it is. It's sad, but it's true. And if YouTube is listening right now and doesn't like that, then you should stop being liars and burying the truth.
Yeah,
you know.
I just think it's funny trying to figure out how to censor yourself because I'm on terrestrial radio, so I can't say any 4-letter words. I can't say things like that. But And so then I'll have like YouTube streamers come on and they won't say, they'll say PDF file. And it's like, it's weird what words you can and can't use depending on the platform. So,
true. Cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
My
We really
pleasure.
appreciate it. We don't, we had a long intro, so we want to get to it for the listener. What we're going to do in this first segment is, we have 3 top takeaways. We're going to hit the first one, which is the theory. And I want to be really clear. We're not saying this is definitive proof. I actually just had lunch with him yesterday. We're not making that claim. But we are saying that we think that there are enough pieces of potential evidence that it's plausible. Definitive? Objective? No. Plausible? Possible? Yes. And so we're going to bring some receipts and lay that out.
All right. Well, ever since Jeffrey Epstein's death in August of 2019, rumors have circulated around the internet he's still alive. They switched him out. We can look at the body here. The ear shape doesn't really quite match. And we all know Epstein was very well connected. So if anyone could pull off being swapped out of jail, a new body put in there, and the narrative getting out, this guy is dead, it would honestly probably have been Jeffrey Epstein. Now, on another note, what we also know about Epstein is that he was an avid video gamer. He literally, as a grown man, in his 40s, in his 50s, was spending money on Fortnite bucks. We see this from the Epstein files, receipts that have been included with what the FBI released. He actually, back in the day, he suggested microtransactions for Black Ops. Those are those terrible little $2 things where it's like, hey, play $2 for this weapon skin. So this guy loved video games, and when you look at the files, you can see that he used a couple usernames very frequently throughout his time. So the same way that maybe you use the same password for all of your accounts. We see from Epstein that he used this username, Little Saint Jeff 1. And we have a receipt in the Epstein files that was his YouTube account, Little Saint Jeff 1. And we also have in the Epstein files that he spent money on a children's video game called Fortnite. Now, what someone connected the dots with, this is just only about probably 24 hours ago, and they're putting the pieces together, and this is actually developing in real time because, as I'll get to, the evidence is being covered up in real time, is that there is a Fortnite account called Little Saint Jeff 1. And if you put this on the screen, the image that I have selected, you'll see that account has a very recognizable flag, and it's not red, white, and blue. It's not yellow. Oh, it's Israel. This account, Little Saint Jeff 1, again, the same account that we know Epstein used with other social media presences. This is a Fortnite account. This is the public view of the account with an Israel flag, bearing the same username. Now, this account is still playing today. This account played, I think, for about 10 hours the last season. It's going on right now, Chapter 6, Season 1, that just launched in August of 2025. So this account is still playing today, but check this piece out. There's one point, the play history of this account. This account's been playing for years, where he doesn't really participate. Fortnite goes on a season model, so there's different chapters and there's different seasons within the chapter. So it's not just a game that's been out for 10 years. There's chapters to this, and there's one chapter where this account doesn't play at all. Chapter 1, Season 10, that ran from August to October 2019, when Jeffrey Epstein was imprisoned, supposedly died, and passed away. And then it resumes play. You can see the 0% right there. That was the season that he didn't play much in. And all the other accounts, spending about 13% of his time on the other season, 5% of his time the season before it, continues to play and continues to play to this day. Now, in and of itself, if that's all we had, truly all we had, it's interesting, but I don't know if it's necessarily enough. But as soon as this was posted and it began making the rounds on the internet, that account immediately went private. Someone saw that this account was getting attention. The person who not just knew of the account, owned the account and had the ability, they went in. Boom, private. The Wayback Machine is a method of archiving internet pages. You want to archive what someone said 10 years ago. You don't want to just store it on your laptop that you could lose. You archive it on something called the Internet Archive Wayback Machine. So whenever someone finds something like this, one of the first things to do, for one, grab your own screenshot that can never be deleted, but is you also go and archive the page as a public record that everybody can see. Everybody can see this account. Well, yesterday, after it was revealed this account was still active, the Internet Archive Wayback Machine removed all archives of that account page. And I mentioned earlier that since 2019, many individuals have made the claim, potentially even guards at the prison, guys, he was swapped out. Now, 4chan is obviously not known for its reliability, but there was one post where someone said, guys, I witnessed at 4 a.m. in the morning them come in, wheel this guy in, wheel this guy out, and the FBI, we now see in the files, interviewed the author of that post. The FBI found it credible enough to take that guy in and say, we want to sit down with you and hear what it is you said. And so that's the evidence put forward. I don't know what you guys think. It's not unthinkable at all that this guy is alive. And when you combine it with the country, again, the country that's in the profile, this is a country where a lot of convicted felons of terrible crimes, they go to. They won't be extradited by the U.S. If they have some type of connection, maybe some type of ethnic, racial connection, you can fill in the dots. A lot of them have fled to this country to live out their days because they'll be protected there.
And we won't say
That's
what
not
country
unthinkable
it is.
at all.
Israel.
It's Israel.
Yeah, no, that's well laid out. Harrison, what do you think?
Yeah, I've had a suspicion that he was alive the whole time. Because, I mean, everything in the Epstein files, like when you told me the title of this stream was going to be the big takeaways, y'all hit on exactly the same takeaways I would have laid out as well. But really, it's coloring in a black and white picture. We've had the black and white picture forever, generally how these things work, what happened. Now we're getting more color. With the Jeffrey Epstein being alive or not thing, it's the same to me. There was a drone shot from somebody named Rushdie Shackelford who went to his island right after he died. And somebody who looks an awful lot like Jeffrey Epstein is seen on the island then. He immediately gets in a car and drives away. There's the discrepancy with the guy's ear. The corpse that they show the picture of, his ear looks different than Jeffrey Epstein's ear. The 4chan post, to me, is the most interesting and probably the most damning of the whole story, because what happens is this guy, before anybody announces that Jeffrey Epstein quote unquote died, like before that official announcement is made, somebody on 4chan says, I work in the jail. They're going to say Jeffrey Epstein killed himself, but there was a very suspicious transfer with this van that didn't sign in and isn't on any of the manifest. This is very suspicious. Jeffrey Epstein dies the next day. So the coincidence of somebody saying they're about to say he killed himself, and then the next day he does, there was already attention on that post, like, okay, he was right. Maybe he was right about other stuff, but still it was just sort of up in the air, like could have been a lucky guess, could have been a troll that just happened to be right. But the fact that the SDNY, the Southern District of New York, subpoenaed 4chan for the IP address of who posted that, and it was somebody that worked at the jail, that's basically total confirmation that he was telling the truth and wasn't making it up and had firsthand knowledge and the ability to know what he was posting. So that to me is massive confirmation. The Fortnite thing is crazy. The fact they took the Internet Archive down, again, just a point
Super
of
suspicious.
super suspicious. Have y'all seen the picture of the guy that looks like Epstein with the crazy hair in Israel?
All grown out. Yeah.
All grown
And
out.
the beard?
And I mean, it is very, very similar. And so I was talking to my wife about this, and it's basically you have to, I find with conspiracy theories, you have to just kind of assume it's all true at once, even the contradictory stuff. Because my wife was asking me about this. She's like, well, why would they let this guy die? Why would they kill him? Wouldn't they want, if he's an agent, don't they want to show that the agents are protected? And it's like, all right, either he was an intelligence agency and he was killed, or he was an intelligent agent and he was killed because they didn't want him talking, and they killed him in a public way to make everybody know, all their agents know, hey, if you think you're going to talk, there's nowhere we can't get to you, even in the federal. So it's like, okay, there's a reason why they would want to kill him and make it public as a message to anybody else who was thinking of blowing the whistle. Or they wanted to fake his death so he could escape. And so it's all these different possibilities, all equally true. We'll never get confirmation one way or the other with any of them, and that's okay. If Jeffrey Epstein was alive in Tel Aviv playing Fortnite, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. If he was murdered by intelligence agents, that also wouldn't necessarily surprise me. And you got to be okay with not knowing one way or the other. That's how I feel about it.
Yep, well said. Wes, Antonio, any thoughts?
I was going to say, when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, he was so well connected and so rich. These people have access to things you and I don't have access to. When he served time in Florida
like fake
prison,
dead bodies.
Like fake dead bodies. That's another level. But think about this. When he went to Florida prison in 2008 to 2009 for soliciting prostitution, he had a setup where he could come and go to jail as he pleased. If you or I got busted for soliciting prostitution, do you think we would get a nice, cushy jail sentence with a video game console, with free visits, literally the ability to come and go as we please? Now, of course, he got that because he was well connected. The prosecutors on the case were told, don't touch him, he's intelligence. So he had all these favors we know from the first time he was in jail. He was able to pull strings. He was able to basically skate on by. And so it's not unthinkable because it's happened before. Man, that feels like a lot to pull off. This guy was in prison. Well, yeah, but we saw what happened when he was in prison before. He basically skated free. He served his little 13 months, had a great time, and got out of it because he's rich.
Yeah. Also, let's say they do try to pull this off. Who is going to bust them? Are the authorities going to bust them? Well, they're in on it. Is the media going to report on it if there's suspicion? Or is the mainstream media going to blow the cover wide open? Of course not. They're in on it too. So the only way it would ever come out would be on some anonymous post on 4chan, just because our entire structure is complicit in all of this.
Right.
Yeah, because you have to realize what this would mean. It would mean that for, at this point now, 6 years, federal authorities, the FBI, the DOJ, they've been essentially lying about someone who, who committed heinous crimes, according to them, that he's actually he's actually dead when he's alive. And if you look at the whole sort of cover-up as it relates to the documents and the Epstein files, they exist, they don't exist. Okay, we're going to release them. We're going to take 2 times as long as we were mandated by federal law to release them. And now even still, you have watchdogs coming out and saying, hey, you haven't released all the files. You haven't released internal communications in the DOJ with respect to how you were going to release the files. So there's all of these questions, and it certainly would implicate the DOJ and leadership even under the Trump administration, but also going back to the Biden administration as it relates to, hey, you haven't released the information. Why has it taken 5 years for you to release this information? And of course, now things are coming out, and we're seeing evidence in the files that, oh, maybe he's actually still alive. Or even with respect to his arrest and his relationships and connections with foreign governments and Israel, it raises more questions than it answers, really. And so, if you're the DOJ, this is something that it's kind of like a wildfire at this point. It's going to be really hard to rein this stuff in.
Yep. Well said. All right. Right now, do us a favor, like the video and share it. Help us get the likes up so it triggers the algorithm, gets this content out to as many people as possible. So like the video, share the video, and if you're not already, subscribe on YouTube. You can subscribe on Rumble, and also follow me on X, where all these videos are posted. We broadcast live on YouTube and X and Rumble. We do it 3 times a week on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. On X, my handle is @JoelWebbin, and on YouTube and Rumble, you just search NXR Studios. Okay, we're going to go to a quick message from our sponsors, and we will be right back.
Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical. Society, real society, has always stood on 3 magnificent pillars: caffeine to kick things off, alcohol to smooth the edges, and nicotine, which is the true gentleman's secret weapon. See, in its glory day, nicotine fueled the greatest minds, the boldest leaders, and the quiet legends who simply got the job done. But somewhere along the way, we lost the plot. Effeminacy began to creep in. Men traded their duty for comfort, and now Big Tobacco sells us nothing but compromise. Knick-Knack raises the old banner again. This is nicotine elevated, honest and intentional, manufactured here in the United States by a family-owned company that refuses to compromise. See, Knick-Knack is a fully dissolvable nicotine lozenge made with just 6 premium ingredients. They're all clearly listed on the back, so you know exactly what's in it. There's no smoke, no pouch, nothing hidden. Essential oils for real flavor in 3 to 6 milligrams. So get Knick-Knacks at knickknack.com. Again, that's knickknack.com. And use code JOEL20! JOEL20! to get 20% off. Or use the store locator to find Knick-Knacks near you. Raise the standard. Reject the slop. Join the pursuit of the good, the true, and the beautiful. Knick-Knack. Crush your vice.
Scripture tells us that when lawlessness increases, judgment is already underway. Cities in chaos, liberals attacking ICE, borders ignored, and order mocked. And while the streets burn, Washington is quietly burning something else: the retirement savings of millions of Americans. Gold has broken $5,000. Silver has broken $100. Even the banks are now admitting that gold could move towards $7,000 and silver an upwards of $300 as debt, war, and instability all collide. For people nearing retirement, there's no time to wait it out. If you want to act with wisdom and not watch decades of work vanish before your eyes, then go to goldsilvermatch.com. Again, that's goldsilvermatch.com. Answer a few short questions, receive a free gold and silver information guide, and be matched with a trusted precious metals provider to see whether physical gold or silver belongs in your IRA, or your 401k, or your savings. Scripture says the prudent man prepares. That begins at goldsilvermatch.com. Again, that's goldsilvermatch.com.
All right, we're back. So the next revelation, I think, that came out of this latest batch of the Epstein file release is it relates to this whole conversation. It's been happening around Epstein, whether he was a Democrat or Republican, and who exactly owns the scandal. And you've seen the politicization of this a little bit in the way that Republicans have obviously tried to frame Epstein as a Democrat. So under the Biden administration, they're saying, oh, well, the Epstein documents are being withheld because there's some implication in the documents that he was a Democrat, supporting Democratic candidates, hodgepodging with Democrat billionaires and those sorts of things. And then as soon as the Trump administration came into power, the conversation obviously flipped. And now you have this massive push from the Democrats. Hey, release the Epstein files. This is a Trump scandal, so on and so forth. And so one of the biggest revelations, and really truly did surprise me, was as you look through the latest Epstein files, you see this massive correspondence between Jeffrey Epstein and Steve Bannon. And if you read through this, and people have done the work of actually making this a little bit more of a readable format, so whether it's Gmail, the emails, and the text messages, what you find is it seemingly Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein were really close friends. I mean, in terms of just the frequency of the correspondence, but also the intimacy of those things. So if you can look at the beginning of 2019, remember Jeffrey Epstein is actually ultimately arrested in July of that year. But all of these things, as it relates to Epstein and his connections and the scandal and the charges, they start dripping out basically in the media at the beginning of the year. So this is February, this is March. And one of the big stories that broke was actually Ann Coulter. She released an article that was subject, Media Magic, How a Democrat Pedophile Became a Trump Scandal. So here even you can see the politicization, the framing of, hey, there's this guy, he's really powerful and he's well-connected and he's a Democrat, but now this is on Trump's hands to deal with. And in the correspondence, and we can pull this up on the screen, in the correspondence as it relates to this article, this is text messages between Steve Bannon and Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein sends the article and says, I'm on her team. Now, Ann Coulter obviously is a political conservative talking pundit, talking head. And he says, I'm on her team to Bannon. And at this time, obviously, Bannon has already started releasing the war room. He's become more or less a MAGA Trump piece. And he says, this is why this is nuttier. And so Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, in this exchange is saying, I'm having Republicans attack me as a Democrat, but I'm not a Democrat. I'm actually on her team, i.e. a Republican. So here is one piece of evidence that you have to suggest that Epstein identified with the Trump movement. Obviously, there's no smoking gun as it relates to correspondence with Trump or correspondence with his campaign directly. But via his relationship with Steve Bannon, it becomes very clear that his motives and his intent in his correspondence and leveraging his connections was to support the Trump administration, predominantly through the scandal related to Michael Cohen and the hush money scandal. And at other points in the text messages, we don't have this on the screen, but Epstein refers to this Ann Coulter story and says, Ann Coulter now on Hannity, should I continue to ignore? Bannon later says, I think this will make it worse. Epstein replies, Sass calling me a child rapist. This is nuts. Sorry, dude. Do you mean to ignore or that responding would make it worse? So he's basically asking him, should I write an op-ed? Should I come out and try to push back against these things? Going back and forth with Bannon as it relates to how will this impact the Trump administration? How can I help Trump by becoming either a punching bag, by laying low, by going on the offense? And here it is again, Bannon as a mouthpiece, basically going back and forth with Jeffrey Epstein on the blowback, the charges that are coming and ensuing those sorts of things. Later, he says Cohen's arrest is bad. So this is 2018 in August. They're going back and forth about Michael Cohen being arrested. He says it's bad. Bannon replies, end of days. And so you see this consistently through the text message, thousands and thousands of text messages with Steve Bannon that Epstein certainly identified, wanted to help Trump. At one point, Bannon, as he's, again, being a Trump mouthpiece and going at economic events and going on to radio shows and talk shows, he's asking him for advice. Hey, Jeffrey Epstein, what should I talk about at this economic event? Jeffrey Epstein replies, let me think about it, and then comes back and says, hey, you need to talk about Venezuela and the oil. You need to talk about Chile. You need to go on the offensive as MAGA. And so time and time again, these kinds of details are coming out. And I think what it ultimately points to is that Republicans do have to own this element of the story. Again, not a smoking gun, but certainly Epstein was not a Democrat, as it appears, at least in the late 2010s, during the first Trump administration, and in various ways, and conceivably through connections, not directly, he's influencing the Trump administration on various points, how to respond to scandal, how to address some particular economic point. And so that's basically the big revelation here is, if you're Trump, what exactly do you take from this? How do you actually go on the offensive now with these files having been released? How do you frame the relationship? Of course, that Trump in the past has said, Epstein's a pretty good guy, and all of these things have been talked about ad nauseum. But ultimately, this is really bad for Republicans. I think people are starting to realize. So.
Yep, well said. Harrison, what do you think as it relates to Jeffrey Epstein? Is this a political battle? Is it left versus right? How would you frame it?
I do think there's a strong left and right element. I don't really agree with this being a Republican scandal. I'll explain why. I don't think Jeffrey Epstein cares one way or the other. I don't think he is politically classifiable as either party. And I think he probably did what a lot of the people around Trump do. I think it's all about Israel, and I think it's about, okay, the left wing has stopped supporting Israel and is against what's happening in Gaza, so they determined that the way that you're going to, keep that support up is by going over to the Republicans. We see that with Bill Ackman and all these other people who were lifelong Democrats until 2024, and they all swapped over. I think maybe Jeffrey Epstein was a little bit ahead of the curve on that. But remember, Jeffrey Epstein went to Bill Clinton's White House dozens of times. Bill Clinton was literally his best friend, and in a lot of the early, decades ago, when they released a lot of the testimony from the witnesses, they're not asked about names. They're just asked, who else should we talk to? We know Jeffrey Epstein's involved. Who else do you think is involved? And every single one of them said, well, Bill Clinton should be the next on your list. So I think in terms of the Republican Party versus Democrat Party is a lot more involved in this. And again, the reason I think it matters is because this all goes back to 2016 and the Pizzagate files, and those came directly out of the Democrat power structure, the Democrat Party. And so for the last 10 years, the entire concept of elite pedophilia, of sex trafficking rings at the highest realms of our government, we could have talked about this, we could have investigated it, we could have actually solved this issue 10 years ago, but it's been the left for the last 10 years that's mocked this and derided this and pretended it didn't exist. I played a video on the Alex Jones show the other day of a clip from the show The Boys, where they go out of their way to mock this entire concept of Pizzagate and QAnon. And they went out of their way to completely discredit all of these claims. So for the left now to say they're the champions and Trump's the pedophile protector, it's just completely absurd and ridiculous. And the swap is really inexplicable to me. I don't know why Trump has done this 180, but I do think I think the political divide matters in that and again, you've got all the, conservatives are not Republicans. The Republican Party is not the Republican idea. It's all of these things are incomplete descriptions of what we're trying to discuss here. But yeah, I think that Jeffrey Epstein and people like him are perfectly willing to use right-wingers, Republicans, whatever you want to call them. George H.W. Bush was involved in the Boys Town scandal in the late 80s, I think, early 90s. And that was pedophilia and all sorts of horrible things. So it's clearly not a left or right issue at the top levels. However, I think the whole paradigm now that it's Republicans who have to own this scandal, I think is a little bit ridiculous, because I think the Democrats have sort of blood on their hands for how aggressively they've shut down any discussion about elite pedophilia for the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think part of what makes it so hairy and blurs the lines is this second administration with Trump.
Yep.
Like that's what's got so many people asking questions, including myself. Is okay, if you're going to be the standard bearer and you're going to, to take a stand for justice and this, that, and the other, this just seems like the perfect alley-oop to slam dunk like atrocious, sinister, immoral issues and hang them like an albatross around the neck of the left, make them untouchable, make them unthinkable. And yet, you don't have that. You have Pam Bondi, sitting on what files? They don't exist. And then you have, Trump like literally mocking his own base when they're saying, we need to get to the bottom of this. You're still talking about that? Why are you still talking about? It's not a good look.
No, it's
I feel
inexplicable
like
as far as I'm concerned.
If it was
crazy.
2024 before November, like if we just turned back the clock about 15 months ago, it would be ironclad. It'd be like, leftist. They are terrible and they're pedophiles. And the right, they've got problems, but not like that. But now it's a lot harder. So let me pick your brain a little further with a little bit more specificity. Why? Why is it that this current administration, whether it's Dan Bongino, or Kash Patel or Pam Bondi or Trump himself, who I like Trump, but I've been pretty disappointed. What's going on? Like, what's the angle? What are they? Why are they not leaning in? Because that's that one of the best defenses is a strong offense, right? It's like I'm not even suspecting so and so to be guilty of such and such because he's like leading the charge against such and such.
Yeah.
But so why not?
I got no answers for it. No, it is utterly inexplicable to me. The only thing that I can rationalize it is that we're dealing with the King Theoden situation here. We got a worm tongue whispering in Trump's ear and basically convincing him this whole Epstein thing, it's all about trying to get you. And that's all that they care about. And it's all about trying to associate you with Jeffrey Epstein. It's an attack on you. And so that's like the whole filter he's hearing it through. Again, it's inexplicable to me because like he's hyper-focused on this Michael Wolff character, which is a good insight. When you're talking about like, okay, was Jeffrey Epstein friends with Trump? Well, Wolff and Epstein are talking about like, Epstein's going, well, we can say he's friends with me if that screws him over. Like, they use their relationships as blackmail material right there. But since it doesn't say anything about Trump, so Trump is so hyper-focused on his image, protecting his image and defending the lies about his image from Michael Wolff, that he's missing this giant, panoply of action that he could be taking that would solidify his image for all of time as a hero of the Republic. Like if he just arrested all these other people, but he doesn't even see that because he's got tunnel vision, thinking it's all about him. And so it's just ironic that he is destroying his own image in his obsession with protecting his own image. I think he needs to get out of that mindset. I don't know how to do that. And I genuinely, the only way I can understand it is that he is being siloed and is being given very, very limited information from people with a very, very particular agenda. That's the only way I can rationalize it.
Who's the worm tongue?
I think it's Susie Wiles. I think it's just all the people around him in his administration. I think it's Marco Rubio. I mean, Marco Rubio's all over these emails, which would be another reason why they'd want to keep it from Trump. Because not only does it expose all of his enemies are rampant pedophiles or friends with him at least, but it's also a lot of his allies that are tied into all these people. I mean, Marco Rubio, from the emails between Ehud Barak and Larry Ellison talking about Marco Rubio is a good member on our team, and we have to introduce him to Tony Blair to get him set. I mean, it's clear Marco Rubio is seen by these people as a very useful ally, if not puppet. So if I was Marco Rubio, I wouldn't want Trump discovering that. So I'd go out of my way to keep him away from it, convince him it was all. And I mean, it's inexplicable. I really have no excuse for it. It is baffling because Trump spent 10 years being the anti-Jeffrey Epstein guy. I mean, the first video I can find where Trump is asked about Epstein, it was in 2015 before he was even a candidate for the Republicans. And it's like a random interview on a trade show floor or conference floor or something. And somebody brings up Jeffrey Epstein and Trump's first response was like, oh, a lot of weird stuff went on that island. You should ask Prince Andrew about that. And this was way before Prince Andrew was like involved. And so like from the first moment, he had sort of an immediate, instinctive reaction to be like, oh, that was messed up and you should ask the prince about that. That to me is not the behavior of a guilty person. Right. But the transformation from that to where we are now is, again, like I said, just inexplicable and has not just abandoned the field where we were winning and getting victory and on the right side. He abandoned it, but then gave it over to the Democrats to where they get to act like they're the ones who are opposing this, which, if anybody has memory of the last 10 years, they have not been. So again, just it's beyond like pulling the football up and Charlie Brown going flying. It's like the football is a grenade or something. It is so unexpected and ridiculous and nonsensical. I'm open to whatever speculation people have, because I got nothing to explain it.
Yeah. Wes, thoughts?
It would make sense, too. Just think about it rationally. The elites, they don't put all their eggs in one basket like we do with a political party. If you're elite, you bring in millions of dollars, you're using tax loopholes. You want to be in the pocket of both sides. We've talked about this before. It becomes a uniparty. Well, it's the Democrats or the Republicans. If you're smart and you have millions of dollars in contracts and relationships riding on it, you just play both sides. There's an email with former Fed chair, or I think he was a lead treasurer of the finance department, Larry Summers, and he asks Jeffrey Epstein, he says, are there any special tax breaks in the 2017 Tax Act? So he's asking Epstein, like, hey, is there anything here that I can use to go ahead and get out of all of these taxes that I owe? Jeffrey Epstein says, he writes back, he says, I don't know of any. They did a great job of closing most, at least for the Goyim. Them, wealthy Jewish elites, and this leads us to our last revelation, right. They have tons of ways to get out of all of this. They're well connected. They don't have to worry about the tax acts that are passed. Now, the stupid Goyim, they pay their taxes. They pay increased taxes. They're giving away 33% of their income to the tax man. But for them at the top, they play both sides. It really doesn't matter whether it's Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George Bush, Trump. For them, it was all just a big game. How do I stay connected? And also, and to this last point, specifically for those that were ethnically Jewish in media, in finance, in these top areas, there was a very self-conception of it's us versus them. Yeah. It's left or right. It's us versus them. We band together, and they even says in one email, they can play in the real world. We play on the finance level. We play with futures trading. We play with the stock market. We make our money there. The dumb goys, right. They work with their hands.
They can herd sheep. We clip coins. It's just two different vocations. That does lead and segue perfectly into the last big takeaway. And I think this is the clearest, right? Whether or not Jeffrey Epstein is still alive, I think it's plausible, but it's not definitive. Whether or not, like we just talked about, and what Harrison was espousing in regards to how much responsibility does the right, particularly Trump and the Trump administration, actually have with Epstein and some of the atrocities that he committed? That's there's a lot of different angles and different narratives that you could take with that. But this last one is, I think, the biggest revelation and the clearest. It is the most substantiated by far. I'm going to read a couple things here. If we have screenshots, which I believe we do, we can put them on the screen. If not, just listen along. But this is from Michael Wolff. And who was closely related to Jeffrey Epstein and helping with legal affairs and those kinds of things. He said, it's a war between, I'm quoting here, the Jews and the non-Jews. Jews are presently winning. Here's another email. This is from Epstein himself. He's recounting an experience, from a dinner party and something that, personally happened that he thought was humorous. And it's certainly something that did take place under the banner of humor as a joke. But as we all know, one of the things that makes humor funny is when there is some kind of element of truth. He says, at my dinner table, I was asked, why are you right-wing guys so anti-Semitic?
He asked that.
To the group of guys who were dining with him. And one of the people who was there said, well, quote, historically, we all know it's actually been the Jews behind the governments actually pulling the strings. And then Epstein says, I said, like who? And one of the people at the table pointed at me, and they all started to roar with laughter. Me? And one guy said, how do you explain? In only 3 days, there have been princes, prime, and other ministers, emissaries, plus 2 presidents of world bodies guilty. So funny, I wish that you were there. He's emailing and recounting this story. The last one I think is most important, and there, just for the record, there are dozens and dozens of examples like this in all the thousands of emails that have been collected and released in this latest batch of the files. But here's just one more example. This is Jeffrey Epstein again. He says, this is the way the Jew makes money and made a fortune over the past 10 years. Selling short the shipping futures, let the Goyim deal in the real world. And that's exactly what Wesley was saying. This idea of we're not going to get our hands dirty. We're not actually going to work in the realm of productivity, but we're going to find different ways to leech ourselves onto transactions. Somebody makes a real product that has real value. Somebody else is going to buy that product, and we're going to create certain systems to where we can insert ourselves as a middleman that somehow profits off of this transaction. Whether, like you think historically, usury, charging exorbitant interest, or whether it's just being involved in futures and shorting and markets and these kinds of things. That really is the sentiment. And I'm not saying that every single Jewish person is involved. There are Jewish people who certainly are not involved. But it's been said before, and I think that that there's a grain of truth in this. Not all Jews are involved, but wherever you find people who are involved, you always find Jews. Not all Jews are involved, but wherever you do find the people who are involved, it's always disproportionately represented by Jews. So if you have a group of elites who are doing something nefarious, and it's 100 elites, and in that particular country, 2% of the overarching population is Jewish, within those 100 elites, you will not only find 2, but you might find 20 or 30. And that is interesting. And at a certain point, when it's not just every time, Susan, but every single time, you have to begin to notice those patterns and come to certain conclusions. The conclusions that you come to shouldn't necessarily, again, be, every single Jewish person, throughout all of time, blah, blah, blah. No, I think that is a rash and unhelpful conclusion. That's kind of like the low IQ anti-Semitism that doesn't actually help the cause because it makes you sound ridiculous. But to say that there actually is something civilizational, there's something about Jewish culture, there's something about, and I would go deeper than that, there's something about Jewish religion. And, Harris and I have talked about this even recently on his show. But it's important to keep in mind, dealing with the religious side of the equation for just a moment. The religion of Judaism, particularly modern Judaism, which would be Talmudic Judaism, is a religion of lawyers. That is what it is. Whereas Christianity, we both share the Old Testament, the Torah. But in the case of Christianity, we have the Old Testament read in light of the New. So we're not detaching, right, the Marcionite heresy and saying the Old Testament doesn't matter anymore because it's been trumped by the New Testament. No, we believe as historic Christians, but Catholics would believe this, Eastern Orthodoxy would believe it, and historic Protestants would believe it as well, all three. We believe that the Old and New Testament is covenantal and that there is a theological continuity, right? A common thread from Genesis all the way to Revelation. So the New Testament doesn't come at like the moon eclipsing the Old Testament, that is the sun, covering it up, replacing it, or as a substitute, but it comes in addition. One theologian once said that the Old Testament is like a richly furnished room, but dimly lit, and it can only truly be appreciated in the light of the New Testament. The New Testament functions not as another room, but as the lamp that's turned on that allows you to now, in full view, appreciate the beauty and the majestic nature of the Old Testament. And what you have to keep in mind is that modern Judaism is not half of Christianity. So it's not the Bible minus the New Testament, right? So the big problem with Judaism is that, we have the Old and New Testament, and they only have the Old Testament. And so therefore, the big problem with Judaism, if that's the way you think, here's the conclusion in a nutshell that you'll come away with. You'll say the problem with Judaism is simply that it's incomplete. It's an incomplete religion. No, it's not incomplete. It's not an incompletion of the truth. It is a full-fledged perversion and twisting of the truth, because they do have a New Testament. Their New Testament, the Mishnah, the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, their lens is such a thick, skewed, opaque lens that what it does is it doesn't function as the lamp that sheds light and illuminates the Old Testament, but it actually covers, eclipses everything that I just said a second ago. That's what Judaism does. The Talmud does eclipse the Old Testament and perverts the Old Testament. So when you think of Christianity in a nutshell, what the New Testament does is it takes the old and it applies it deeper to the spiritual realm, not just the physical realm, but the spiritual, not just the hands and feet or the mouth and what we say and speak, but the heart, how we feel, the mind, what we think. And so Christianity takes the Old Testament, doesn't replace it, but illuminates it, expands and exegetes the Old Testament, and brings it down in the realm of application to the level of the heart. Whereas what you could say is that Jesus is not pitted against Moses. Jesus actually accentuates Moses and says, you have heard Moses say this, and I tell you, Moses was right on the money. He nailed it. And the further application of the principle he espoused is that it doesn't just apply to what you outwardly do and outwardly say, but it actually applies even to the inward motives of your heart. Whereas so Jesus expands, in a nutshell, he expands the law that we have in the Torah and applies it not just at a cultural level or an outward level or a national level, but individual, heart, thoughts, inward motives. He makes it greater. The law is now even comes to bear even further on the person, which actually the result of that is that it further indicts with real moral guilt before a holy God each and every man, woman, and child on earth, which drives us with a desperate need to a Savior who has actually fulfilled the law in our place, died because of our sin, and makes us right with God. But what Judaism does is it actually takes Moses and lessens it. It gets, actually, in a very lawyer kind of way. There's a reason why lawyers have been universally despised by the majority of people for a very long time. What Judaism does is it says, well, Moses said this, but actually it only applies in this case on a Tuesday at 3 p.m., but actually for a few shekels, it's actually Moses just means, and that's what they do. So think about this when it comes to all the Old Testament laws about giving your word, your oath, your bond, right? A vow. Well, Judaism comes in and says, actually, you can swear by the temple, just as so long as you don't swear by the gold of the temple, because that's what's really important. With Judaism is what's the most valuable, part of the temple that can be wielded down into shekels. That's the thing that's actually holy. That's the thing that shouldn't be profaned. Whereas Jesus takes that and says, well, wait a second. Is it the gold that makes the temple holy, or is it the temple of God that purifies the gold? And then Jesus goes further than that, says, actually, so Moses says, don't swear by the temple. Jews say, well, it's actually only the gold in the temple. So they're actually lightening it. Jesus raises the bar. He says, I tell you, don't swear at all, but let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't be looking for loopholes. Don't take the law of God and pervert it to where you can take the heart principle, but extract from it a legality that allows you to do the very thing Moses told you not to do, which is lie, make deceitful oaths, but you just have to do it through this way. That's Christianity in a nutshell, is taking the Old Testament, not replacing it, but exegeting it, extracting from the Old Testament the overarching principle, and then applying it not just to the outward, but the inward. Right? Not inward, but the inward, the heart. Whereas Judaism is taking the outward and making it even more truncated and narrow, to where as long as you have the IRS code, as long as you have the rule manual, and you've gone through all the classes and you know the loopholes, you actually can commit the very sin that God was saying in his law through Moses not to commit, but you're somehow absolved on a technicality. That is the issue. And so my point in saying all that is that I think Harrison's right that there is a political divide, but that divide has been more blurred than ever through the second administration with Trump. And I think the reason why the divide has become so blurred is because I think that Jews, again, not each and every single one of them, but many of the billionaires, the elites, that Jews, particularly in America, so I'm not just speaking, because that's easy. Let's just be honest, guys. That's easy to just say, well, I'm just criticizing a foreign nation, right? It's a lot easier to criticize a nation than to criticize people, right? But what I'm saying is leave Israel out of it for a second, leave Netanyahu out of it for a second, and let's get real. There are a lot of Jews here in the United States. Not all of them is what I'm about to describe, but some of them, particularly those who are powerful and rich and wealthy and elites, historically, we know this in terms of voting patterns. Historically, they have been almost entirely, like landslide. You can look at the voting patterns like 80, 85%, 90% vote Democrat until pretty recently. And when I look and ask that question, why? It seems actually really simple. And the simplicity is the left became very anti-Jew and very anti-Israel and very anti, all these kinds of things. And as the left began to not be a strong support of Israel, but also Jewish people in general, and especially Jews in America, seeking the things that would benefit them, they switched parties. It's literally Johnny Depp on the Pirates of the Caribbean. The ship is slowly sinking. He's up in the crow's nest, and that's the left in terms of its disposition towards Jews, and it's sinking. And then at the last minute, he steps onto the dock that is the right. And I think when I think of Trump, like, well, what could explain it? It's so complicated and multifaceted. Actually, it's pretty simple. Trump was cheated in 2020. He knew that there was never, ever going to be a possible way for him to get in office again to save the country, which I think he really wants to do. I think that his intentions were good, unless he got some help. And some of the people who were willing to help him, the Adelsons, $100 million there, that person, this person, they come in. And so now Trump still wants to clean things up, but there are some things that need to be cleaned up that are off limits because he got help. It's either he was robbed in an election and he would lose the next one too, be robbed in that one too, or he would actually get into office, but the compromise was that he would have to form some allies, and those allies would say that yes, you can do this, and yes, you can do that. Those things that are in your heart to do that would be good for the country will allow you to do that, but you can't look over here. You can't do this. And so in that sense, yes, politically speaking, the left, Democrats, historically, have absolutely been far more involved with Epstein and these kinds of things. But recently, I think we have to acknowledge that there has been a pivot to where now I feel like both the right and the left are implicated at some level with these kinds of issues. I think the explanation for that is quite simple. It's that Trump had to make some alliances that now make him compromised on these issues. And the reason why is because the left was no longer serving Jewish people, and they had to make a switch to the right. And so that's the political layout, but the one consistent denominator, right? Left for a while, now some of them being on the right for a while, that's politically. But the thing that has never changed, in my assessment, is the religious divide, the civilizational divide, the sense that, one thing that not all Jews, but some Jews, elite Jews, seem to be absolutely committed to, where they will never break ties, is what political party or what cultural issue or whatever is going to allow us to continue to have a religion of lawyers and litigation and loopholes to benefit us at the expense of the host, right, the native populace, versus which side is going to actually be America first and not really serve us. And I feel like they'll switch alliances on a dime, but the common denominator, the one true guiding North Star, is what allows us to take shortcuts and to benefit our people, which, for the record, I think the means by which that's being done is on technicalities, and I think it's done in a overall all immoral way. The instinct, though, I've said it before, I'll say it again. My desire for heritage Americans is that they would simply want and work for themselves, work towards things for themselves. I want Americans to simply do and work towards the same kind of thing that Israel would work for their country. Like the general notion of I don't just view myself as an individual. I view myself as a part of a group. I actually have such a thing as my people. I belong to them. There's a collectivist mentality, and I'm going to vote in such a way and work in such a way and think in such a way that benefits my own. That's actually not, now what means you take can be immoral, but that sentiment is not inherently wrong. That's actually, I would argue, that's actually a biblical good sentiment. It's natural affections. It's the ordo amoris. It's loving your people, your kin, your extended family. That's actually a right instinct. And at the end of the day, that's not unique to Jews. That's literally every group of people on the planet. There's only one group that doesn't think that way. And it's, let's be honest, it's white people. It's white Westerners. It's white Europeans. Like white Christians are pretty much the only people on the planet that don't view themselves as a group and work towards, with an in-group preference towards their own good. Everybody else does. So it's actually not just Jews. Jews just do it better than Ugandans. Jews just do it better than the Japanese. They just do it better than, because they've always been a minority until very recently, having their own country for centuries and centuries. They're a minority living in another land where there's a general populace, there's a majority that is native, that is seeking their own benefit. And so you, as a minority living in someone else's country, are thinking, how can we get something for ourselves? And Jewish people for centuries with that kind of history behind them that caused them to think in these sort of ways, I don't think that they're unique in the sense that no other people wants to benefit their people. All peoples want to benefit their people, except for white people, for whatever reason. But Jews just have a lot of practice.
Yeah,
I think that's...
Well, and let's not forget that the white people not taking our own side is a very, very new development. Right. I was just reading a book yesterday from Robert E. Howard, Pulp Fiction writer from Texas in the 30s. And, there's a scene where a guy comes upon a fight and there's two guys fighting. He doesn't know either guy. He doesn't know what the fight's about. But like in the book, it's like, but one guy was white, so he wouldn't hit the black, he wouldn't hit the non-white guy. And it's just sort of, in the 30s, it was like, yeah, of course, white people are going to, if you see a white guy and a not white guy fighting, you're going to side with the white guy because he's on your team. So the whole idea that that's not how white people think is a very, very new and deliberately created development. I think you're pointing to so many things that are like the core, the progeny, the beginning point of so many of our problems, like the technicality aspect of what you're talking about, not the spirit of the law, but the letter of the law. That's the same thing I see with like asylum, right? We have these wonderful things like asylum where you go, hey, if you really need help, we can, circumvent the rules for you. And people go, oh, so all I have to do is say these magic words and then I get in, right? It's, technically I have to fill these, check these boxes and then I get in. It's taking it away from the spirit of law towards the technical letter of the law, and that is destroying us in like a million different ways. Same thing with welfare. Oh, well, it's welfare, money's out there. All I have to do is say I have an autistic kid. Great, my kid's autistic. Give me the money. And so it completely strips it from the meaningfulness and why we actually have these things in the first place. I think you're exactly right about Donald Trump. I just think it wasn't a flip. It's a continual battle that's going on. And I've been reporting on this since the second Trump administration began because there are instances like the Signalgate phenomenon with Pete Hegseth, how you had Mike Waltz, who was communicating behind Trump's back with Netanyahu before Netanyahu was coming over, giving him, a leg up on the negotiations. He got fired for that. He actually got made UN ambassador, so it wasn't exactly a firing, but that's the way things work. It's maybe the best we could hope for. But that whole thing was organized around trying to oust Pete Hegseth, getting him in the Signal chat, leaking the Signal chat to a fellow Zionist at the Atlantic, publishing it, saying Pete Hegseth has to go because Pete Hegseth didn't want to go into war with Iran. Vance was another voice against war with Iran. They forced some of his underlings out. Like, there's been an ongoing battle of people in the administration trying to oust people that aren't on their side and trying to manipulate things. So I think when you look at this, I always describe it like if you're looking at the water and you see big bubbles float up and it's like there's something happening under. There's a whale and an octopus fighting each other to death. We can't quite see it, but you can see the bubbles every once in a while. You can see the waves. And that's what, if you're looking for it, you can see that. And so I think the whole idea of, because it's like, okay, if Trump was 100% on their team and was just a straight up puppet for Israel, we would have been at war with Iran already. There's a million things we would have done that we haven't done because there is this friction that exists there. I also think like bringing Netanyahu back and connecting this to the last topic, like Netanyahu is technically a far right winger, right? In Israel, he's a far right winger. Does that mean he believes in free speech or gun rights or, American tradition that are associated with the right wing in America? Of course not. And which is why, and I think we're going to play the video, The Eighth Front, a little bit later. And one of the things I did deliberately was show Netanyahu and then Jonathan Greenblatt, because these are often presented as the two poles. Well, those are the liberals, not the conservatives, or the right-wing Jews. They're our friends. They're saying exactly the same thing in exactly the same words. So when it comes to these types of conflicts, the right wing and left wing sort of goes out the window. Especially, in the email about from Michael Wolff, where he says the war between Jews and non-Jews, Jews presently winning, that was in response to the fact that Bannon was fired from the National Security Council. So even though Jeffrey Epstein's supposed to be friends with Bannon, here he is celebrating his ouster with Michael Wolff saying, Jews are winning against the non-Jews. Which again, it's just the politics. It's meaningless to them. There's a higher division that they're concerned in. And then, but I think you might be a little bit off the mark on the religious thing because these people are not Jewish. None of these people are practicing Jews. And in their own emails, it's genetic for them. They're genetic testing for it. It's, I'm 98%, I'm missing that 2%. It's not about religion for them. It's about genetics. So this is a purely racialist. But I think what you're pointing out
it's civilizational and racial. All I would
Yes.
say with that is that the religious piece is default. So I don't think it requires for it to be conscious or intentional. So I would say like Americans, how many Americans actually, Pew Research has done polls and things like that. How many Americans actually show up and darken the door of a church? Like how many Americans attend church? How many Americans have made, a credible profession of faith in Christ? How many Americans would actually self-identify as being Christians? And yet, we all acknowledge that America, because of its uniquely Christian history, there is a general Christian milieu that every single American is swimming in, whether they tip the hat to Christianity in some outward formal sense or not. I would say like every heritage American has Christian default positions that they can't even explain, and they wouldn't even be able to correlate to Christianity, but it's still there. And so what I would say is that, yes, most Jews are secular in terms of their religious affiliation. They're not practicing Judaism. But if you have a particular religion with the kinds of tenets that I outlined earlier, and those are core tenets of the religion, and that religion shapes a group of people over the course of centuries, and you currently, your generation doesn't practice that religion, and maybe your father's generation doesn't practice that generation, but your grandfather did, your great-grandfather, your great-great-grandfather, and so on and so forth for like 1,300 years, 1,700 years, and you've been non-practicing for the last 80 years. I would say that the core tenets of that religion are still there, functioning subconsciously beneath the surface, whether you acknowledge it or not.
100%. And what I was going to say with that is that, the way to see this, I think it's fairly simple. It's a Jewish mafia, right? And this is, people, well, it's not all Jews. It's like, well, not all Italians are in the mafia, but there's an Italian mafia. This isn't confused. It only gets confusing when it comes to Jews for some reason, but everybody gets how this works with every other ethnicity. The difference is when you have something like the Italian community, it's bound by Catholicism that is clearly at odds with their actions in the mafia. They say not to murder, but you're out there murdering. You can justify it how you want, but there's still there's a restriction there and an acknowledgement that you're performing some sort of hypocrisy. That hypocrisy doesn't exist when you're going by an Old Testament set of laws that was built for people to survive the Bronze Age. You have a lot of rabbis and Jewish teachers that will justify all of this stuff and basically say, yeah, we're still sticking by the same rules that existed, that were built for Jews to survive this rough and tumble, existence during the Bronze Age that Jesus, changed the rules of. I know didn't abrogate them or anything, but, certainly updated them for a modern audience, you might say. But they're still, for Jews, that's still the set of rules. So, behaving in the ways that they behaved against Amalek or the Edomites is still a valid worldview according to some of the religious teachers. So I do think that the structure of the religion informs what they're able to justify in themselves.
That's a good insight. That's well said, because I like the example you gave of like Italians as it relates to the mafia, as it relates to Catholicism, right? In that case, it's like all Italians are in the mafia. Nope. But within the Italian mafia, it's made up of predominantly Italians. And those Italians, they have, even though they probably wouldn't be practicing either, they might, tip the hat and have some cultural Catholic, elements, but by and large, like they're not going to mass, they're not, they're not practicing. But for them, it's there's this constant sense of like glaring hypocrisy.
Yeah.
Whereas like for someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who did actually, in his case, like I know guys want to make him sound completely secular, but the dude had the Talmud on his shelf in his office.
That's true. Yeah.
Like
he had a temple on his island. So I mean,
yes, I don't actually think it's fair in the case of a lot of modern Jews living in America today. In the case of
Leslie
Epstein,
Wexner,
though,
CEO of Victoria's Secret, Jewish.
yeah,
but
Larry Ellison, there's plenty. Sam Altman, I don't think that he's like religiously, practicing Judaism. Epstein, I actually think breaks the mold a little bit. I think that guy actually was somewhat pious, somewhat devout. And that's the big thing. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's a really, really profound insight, is to say that in this case, the Jewish mafia, all Jews are in it. No, but the Jewish mafia is made up predominantly of Jews. But in that case, there's not the same degree of the glaring hypocrisy within Italian mafia and Catholicism, Jewish mafia and Judaism. In the Italian case, they would have to say, well, if they were pressed, they'd have to say, we don't care. We're really not that Catholic. In the Jewish scenario, though, they would say, yeah, you got me. But then they'd call their rabbi on speed dial and be given a religious argument with 10 degrees of loopholes that says, actually, you didn't break any rules.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And
that's the difference.
And you can find a lot of rabbis saying that type of stuff. And I think, the fact that, to me, the sort of shocking thing is the casualness with which they say things like goyim or, make disparaging comments. Because again, you just have to imagine if this was the emails of, Trump and J.D. Vance are dropping the N-word in private, you'd be like, oh my God, like you didn't even wonder if this would be okay. And you were, you didn't expect at all them to say, whoa, buddy, we don't use that type of language around here. It's clear that this is an understood mindset among them. And these are some of the most powerful people in the world. If this is how they're talking in private, you don't think that contributes to the decisions they're making at the corporate level? I mean, you're running the NBA and you're talking about, talking like this about non-Jews. This is horrific. And it also goes to why they can perform some of the heinous stuff that you see, some of the really dark, dirty, disgusting stuff. Well, this is a tried and true, strategy of circumventing morality or even like human compunction and guilt is racism. And that's all it is. It's, well, they're subhumans. You don't really have to feel that bad about them. It's literally, it's why Japanese people were depicted like monkeys in World War II, because you expected a bunch of, good men from Nebraska to go kill a bunch of people they didn't know. You had to dehumanize them first. So the dehumanizing aspect contributes directly to the pedophilia, the rapes, all this sort of stuff. It again is a way to circumvent morality. And then the final thing, it's like, it's the same thing that happens over and over. I see it with races all the time, where it's like, if I see a video of a black guy attacking a white guy, my takeaway is not, oh my God, black people are violent. But then you go into the comment section and you see 100,000 comments from people going, hell yeah, get that white boy. And it's like, okay, maybe we do have a problem here. Maybe this is an issue. It's, the fact that there are Jews that are doing crazy stuff is not a condemnation of all Jews. The fact that no media outlets are covering this, and that Jewish people that are good people feel the need to defend this, that is very disturbing and is a problem, I think, within the Jewish community, of them really weaponizing sort of collective trauma to force their own herd into greater conformity. I think it's a double-sided blade that's used against Jews and non-Jews, is this anti-Semitism claim, because when people are scared and need protection and you're there to provide it, it's very useful to inspire the very fear that would drive them to you.
Yep, I think the big unavoidable takeaway for a lot of the laymen, just your average Joe who read through the files or, watched somebody's commentary like ours on the files, the unavoidable takeaway for many is that white supremacy may be real. Jewish supremacy is definitely real. That's the big takeaway, is just the nonchalant, trivial attitude of disdain towards non-Jewish people. And it's like, well, that's just one guy. Well, actually, it was a lot of guys around that guy. And then everybody else, right? If it was this kind of language from some white guy talking about non-whites, it would be headline news. Every major station would be picking it up. And so I think that's the unavoidable conclusion for me, is that on the racial piece, and I think there are religious reasons, underpinnings for that, whether that individual is practicing or not, but on the racial side of the aisle, it seems like Jewish supremacy is absolutely real and undeniable, and not just real for a few Jewish elites, but has to be more widespread by the sheer fact that the non-Jewish elites won't cover it. They won't address it. It somehow gets a pass that we know any other kind of racial supremacy, especially white supremacy, would never get that kind of pass. Wes and Antonio, any final thoughts on this?
I would just say, if you're not willing to look at the entire trajectory of Jeffrey Epstein's career and conclude that he got where he got the connections, the money, everything that he had, that he got that through some level of in-group preference. I mean, I mentioned Leslie Wexner, CEO of Victoria's Secret. He gave to Jeffrey Epstein power of attorney to act on his behalf for millions and millions and millions of dollars. Jeffrey Epstein, his friendship with Ehud Barak, former prime minister of Israel, his longtime girlfriend and accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father, Robert Maxwell, ran weapons on behalf of Israel. So many other connections. They're in the emails. They're in his early life. He was able to access the levels of power, the money, all of those different things because he explicitly had an ethnic identity that favored him, that hired him, that trusted him, was willing to look the other way for him. And if you're not willing to be honest, you just need to come out and say, I am unwilling to look at the crimes of these people because they're Jewish. I'm unwilling to look at how they favored one another. I'm unwilling to look at how they looked out for one another. I won't see it. I literally refuse to. And that's going to impair the conversation more than sitting down and being honest and say, hey, you got these connections because these people felt an ethnic bond to one another. What is something reasonable, moral, that should be done about it?
Because we're not covering this because they're Jewish, but they are covering it up because they're Jewish.
Well said.
It's different.
Yeah, and we also have to remember, and we've talked about this on prior episodes, that this whole enterprise of plurality that emerged in the mid-20th century, it was essentially rules for thee and not for me, for white people. So, and going back to your point, Harrison, as it relates to, on X or something, a white and black person fighting, like it's perfectly appropriate for black people to believe that they're better, to see themselves as an in-group that is sort of combating the white majority. And that was a whole point of plurality, was that so you can have Jews thinking of themselves that way and Asians thinking of themselves like that way and so on and so forth, for all of the minority groups to be able to identify themselves as an in-group, to prefer one another, to recommend their lawyers and their doctors and to experience or sort of exercise preferential hiring for one another. All of these things are perfectly appropriate in this system. And so it shouldn't surprise us that Jews are operating along the same lines as the black community does, for example.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the thing that's strange is that everyone does it except for whites. And, I say strange, it's novel. That would be more accurate. It's actually not strange. It is quite easy to explain that white people have been indoctrinated for approximately 75, 80 years now to think that identity politics is inherently wicked, to think that collectivism is somehow always communist and that individualism is somehow innate to Christianity. Those kinds of things, like white people literally have been trained to think that if you view groups at all, that you're doing something wrong, that you're doing something immoral. And some of the best guys, who have shed a light on the nefarious dealings of Israel with Gaza, or shed a light on this or shed a light on that. That final step, they're not willing to, they're still operating within, is right-wing as they might be, they're still functioning within the liberal framework of Group identity politics, bad. Collectivism, bad. Raw individualism, good. The problem, though, is that all their constituents, who are predominantly white people, are the only ones playing by those rules. Everybody else is literally just laughing at us and saying, that's great. You guys continue to fracture and view yourselves strictly as individuals, and we'll all view ourselves as teams and function as teams. And that's just a recipe for disaster. And if the biggest right-wing voices, who are good on a host of issues, still won't acknowledge that one issue, then it's like having a guy who's like a star player on an NBA team, but the referees in the league have rigged it against this one team. And this guy's really, really good, but he's rigged it to where all the other teams they don't have to dribble. They get to just hold the ball and run down the court. And this guy, he's like a star player, but he keeps insisting that his team, every time they get together and they're making, a plan for the next play, the team is like, guys, I think we should just hold the ball and run down the court also. And he's like, no. And he really is a great player. He inspires people. He's a great shot, like all this, but he refuses to say, look, let's just play by the same rules that everybody else is playing. He refuses to do that. And so ultimately, as much of a star player as he is, he's still ultimately hurting the team. And I feel like that's where we're at with some guys on the right. And until we acknowledge that, I think we're destined to lose.
And you know what's weird? Sorry to interrupt, but
go ahead.
This is a weird form of white supremacy that they express. They genuinely think that white people can't suffer. So they're just like, no, you don't have to defend them. White people are too powerful to defend. It's like, no, guys, white people are just another race like any other race. Because what you're talking about, the people that are out there that refuse to acknowledge white people, white suffering, collective white interests, they don't have that same compunction about any other group. If they found out that Nigeria was being replaced with migration from Timbuktu, they'd be against it. They'd be outraged. They would recognize it. So it really is their own bias that prevents them from treating white people like they are happy to treat everybody else. They really do have to get over that.
No,
white
you're right.
people are not special.
Well, it's funny.
We
It's
can die.
profound what you said, because not only do they have a bias that they need to acknowledge, but the irony is that the reasoning for that bias is a subconscious, subtle form of white supremacy. It's like, we can afford to play by these rules, even though the whole rest of human history, nobody has played by these rules before, but we can do it, ... The fine print is because we're actually better than everyone, and so we can have an added hindrance and still win. And it's like,
It's not true.
It's actually not true, and the last 80 years have proved it. We are currently not winning. I think that's fascinating. We're going to go to one more message, one more advertisement announcement that's important for you guys to hear. It's with one of the books that we have, that we've recently published, that deals with this topic at length. And then when we come back, we're going to start answering your super chats. As soon as we do the super chats and we're done with that, we're going to show this video that Harrison compiled and put together, and it doesn't have any commentary. It's just Jewish elites in their words, and showing their plan and what they are not just going to do, but what they're already doing. It's about 14 minutes in length. It's gone super viral. I believe it's 6 million views.
I think it was at 7 yesterday.
No, I think it's 6.
It's
I thought it only hit
unbelievable. how many-
271,000.
It's allowed.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly not 271,000 views. We'll say this: it could be 7, it could be 8. You could always have more views, but it is not less. Not a single view less than 6 million. We know that for sure. All right, let's go to a quick announcement, and we'll be right back.
If you had told Stephen, as stones were crushing his body, that he was dying for a shared Judeo-Christian foundation, he would have called it blasphemy. The first martyr died proclaiming Christ alone, not a hyphenated faith shared with those who killed the Lord Jesus and the prophets, and who drove out the apostles, and, as the apostle Paul declared, oppose all mankind. Learn why the church has always stood apart in the hyphenated heresy Judeo-Christianity. Reclaim the faith of the martyrs and pick up your copy today at Amazon.com.
All right, so we have a video that Harrison Smith has put together. It doesn't include any commentary. It's not him trying to piece things together. It's literally just a bunch of Jewish elites, politicians, billionaires, fill in the blank, in their words, what they're saying, not just their plan of what they will do, but a plan that's already well underway, things that they are actually doing. We're going to show this video. It's gone super viral. It already has like 7 million plus views. And so we want to show it. It's about 14 minutes in length. And then we're going to come back because we actually have Harrison in person live in the studio with us. And I want to just ask him some questions, pick his brain, and get the commentary that the video doesn't actually include. So we'll show the video, but now, because we have Harrison here, I want to say, all right, what are some of your conclusions, takeaways? What do you think this video actually conveys, and what should we do about it? So here's the viral video that Harrison Smith put together.
I think there's another revolution coming. I tend to steer it along with the achievement of a broader peace. When history is within reach.
So what Israel is fighting here is not merely a seven-front war, but an eighth-front war. For the Jews against Rome. Rome and Jerusalem clashed over values, with a great tragedy for the Jewish people. Well, we lost that one. We have to win the next one. But the new Rome, the United States, Jews against Rome.
We stopped playing defense and have moved to offense.
The weapons change over time. You can't fight today with swords. That doesn't work very well.
But we need the kind of genius that manufactured Apollo gold pagers and infiltrated Hezbollah for over a decade to prepare for this battle.
But we have to fight with the weapons that apply to the battlefields in which we're engaged. And the most important ones are the social media.
Because the next war will be decided based on how Israel and its allies perform online as much as offline.
This is the eighth front, the disinformation campaign.
It is actually this eighth front where our enemies believe they can actually defeat the Jewish state.
This is the kind of ingenuity and inventiveness that have always been a hallmark of the state of Israel, that have always been a characteristic of the Jewish people. I know we can do it.
A lot of this is done with money.
Invested billions and billions of dollars in the information battlefield.
Money of NGOs, vast. Money of governments, vaster.
We prohibit harmful stereotypes about Jewish people, such as claims that Jews control financial, political, or media institutions.
You're damn right we're going to cancel them and deplatform them.
We monitor them online, social media, messaging apps, video games, cryptocurrency.
Hitler admirers, Stalin admirers, Jew haters.
Podcasts, short form video, Wikipedia, LLM.
American haters, Churchill haters.
We monitor these people and we share the intelligence with the FBI.
You think your stupid little podcast is going to change the world like hell it is?
Social media, this is the new battlefield.
You don't get to wrap your psychotic, mental, unhinged Nazi.
We do not allow Holocaust denial and distortion.
And the most important purchase that is going on right now is
TikTok.
TikTok, number one.
For every 30 minutes that someone watches TikTok, they become 17% more anti-Semitic.
So you have TikTok just smashing our young people's brains all day long with video of carnage in Gaza.
And so we really have a TikTok problem.
Because anything that we try to say to them, they are hearing it through this wall of carnage, and I sound obscene.
Anti-Zionism is just Jew hatred.
We made a change.
We updated our policies
to designate the use of the term Zionist,
to recognize that the term Zionist
as a proxy for a protected attribute
can be used as a proxy for Jews and Israelis
as hate speech.
Why can't Israel be doing some sort of, counterintelligence?
Right now, the ADL is co-writing Sunday school curriculum.
Information warfare like this.
It's building the technology to train the LLMs more effectively.
Like psychological operations in America.
As part of a robust framework to combat anti-Semitism, we have industry-leading policies designed with the safety of the Jewish community in mind.
You're right, we control the media. So what are you going to do about it? You're going to bitch on Twitter? Like, okay. Meanwhile, we're going to control more of the media.
And working with OpenAI, with Alphabet, with Anthropic, with Meta, with Microsoft, we are working with them now to train the LLMs.
We also have, I think, over 24 Jewish organizations that are constantly feeding us intelligence and information.
So number one, we measure and track. Number two, we monitor and disrupt. We have a whole apparatus. I have 40 analysts working full-time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, monitoring extremists.
Monitoring campuses, digital networks, activist groups, and public officials.
We have several PhDs on staff. We have a network of academics and scholars we work with around the country.
I've talked to the leaders of AI in the world, and you ask yourself, there's so many blessings in this, but there could be a curse.
First thing a country needs to do is to unify all of their data so it can be consumed and used by the AI model.
We need to invest in intelligence to understand who are the anti-Semites, who's funding them, what's their plans, who are the leaders. And then once we have that, we can define who is an enemy we can attack.
You have to take all of your healthcare data, your diagnostic data, your genomic data. We have to take all of this data we have in our country and move it into a single, if you will, unified data platform.
Once we have all this information, we need to empower and mobilize an ecosystem of many organizations that we can incentivize them to work together, to share, and to fight against our common enemies.
Mobilizing millions of people, of allies that are quietly by our side.
Citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on.
You know, anti-Semites, most of these people running around, we're not going to win their hearts and minds because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds. So, you know, how are we going to, there's no reason to think we're ever going to convince them, but we can deport them, we can put them in jail, we can make their lives miserable, we can cut off their funding.
You've got all these conspiracy theorists online going on and on about how, you know, if you try and say anything, if you try and do anything against Jews, they're going to come after you.
We have featured more than 1,000 anti-Semites.
And they're going to destroy you and take away your business, and therefore you have to be really, really scared.
These Jew haters have faced real consequences, including firings, suspensions, and expulsions.
And it's kind of starting to become true.
We will shine a light on you that will follow you for the rest of your life. When you look for a job, when you look for a spouse, when you look for a nanny, when you look for anything.
And I love that. I love it.
We remove hate speech against Zionists when these harmful stereotypes about Jews are invoked.
In the past 12 months, ADL's filed more lawsuits than in the prior 112 years.
Over the weekend, I received concerning news that I was being sued for $5 million.
Vicious, communist, racist, Jew-hating, Israel-bashing monster.
Defendant frequently posts anti-Israel rhetoric accusing Israel of controlling the United States and its politicians.
We at the ZOA will fight these dangerous and monstrous lies with all of our hearts and souls. No appeasement, no conciliation, only a war against this racist hatred of the Jewish people.
When there is a war, it doesn't matter who your enemy is, you need to destroy their offspring to prevent them from creating more offspring.
What you try to do is you want to corral your victim, but in fact, your countries are the victim. So you dehumanize a group of people in human society, and you prepare them for the kill, for the butchery.
A government can do in 2 months more than any organization can do in its lifetime.
The J7 is comprised of the 7 largest diaspora communities. We meet every other week via Zoom to share information, to share best practices.
And we're running everything all the time from focus groups to attitudinal surveys to randomized controlled trials to identify what interventions work most effectively.
Finally, we have meetings that are some off the record, some on the record with world leaders in which we share our community's concerns and call for action.
The entire education system in this country, from K through 12 in colleges, must be reformed.
But it's time to limit the First Amendment in order to protect it.
The way we solve anti-Semitism is pretty goddamn simple.
Take control over what they are saying.
Send their ass to jail. It's not complicated.
And quickly before it's too late.
We're monitoring political Islamists and Christian nationalists, all of them. And then we train. We're the largest trainer of law enforcement in America, extremism and hate. We train 20,000 officers every year.
Try that again.
here because of the comments made online about the Jewish community.
We deeply value our partnership with law enforcement. We've been working with them literally since the FBI was founded in the 1930s.
Okay, so is that your account? That guy who consistently calls for the death of all Palestinians, that can probably incite somebody to do something radical. That's all we're here to talk about, I would think, to refrain from posting things like that.
We are going to have a whole division within the office of the Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism that is going to work on technology.
We must take all of our technological expertise and all of our available resources to develop methods to launch and win a significant counter-information campaign.
The products of our technical capacities and sometimes technical and intelligence genius, and we're happy to do it.
The office is going to be revamped entirely to be one of the highest profile offices in the State Department.
Because it's not working. Too many young people have never heard of the Holocaust.
The only solution right now is for the governments to decide that all the Jews are a protected minority. That means that the government will be obliged to provide the security.
Upgrades to security. Jewish community shouldn't have to be paying for it. We have to pay for our own armed guards? Are you serious?
To fund the institutions, culture, and that everybody in Europe will learn about the Jewish contribution and why they should cherish Jewish presence.
All your synagogues, all your shuls, all paid for. Everything. Everything that you need is paid for. I, for one, as a Jewish leader, will no longer talk about anti-Semitism in isolation from Israel. It's what we want immediately. If you ask any Jew, what do you want? What do you want? No more protests. No more protests.
I'm not an anti-Semite. I just don't like the government of Bibi Netanyahu. No, you're a Jew hater.
Would a group be banned if it accuses Israel of genocide or apartheid?
If those criteria are satisfied, then that is the case.
Any candidate running for a seat in this building, whether for Congress or Senate, we will target them as they target us. Accordingly, we will start a fund to help their opponents.
Beginning already in Q1, hedge funds get set up in Israel so we can become another capital of finance. I'll argue we will beat London within a short decade as the second capital of finance. It's going to be New York as a gateway to America, Hong Kong a gateway to China, Dubai a gateway to Southeast Asia, and Israel as a gateway to other parts of the world.
So we heard earlier about a mission, a goal to bring 1 million immigrants to Israel.
History has proven that when a country starts with allowing anti-Semitism, the results are not kind to that country.
I want to make a warning to somebody else, and that's American Gentiles. The minute your country is taken over by anti-Semitism, the minute you start to be a country that's not blessing Israel but cursing Israel, you have begun the process of shrinking away from your empire.
And you can decide, you can stay here in New York in a declining empire, or you can come to Israel, which is part of the rising middle of the world, which is moving south and east. That's what I encourage you to do.
Our faith in the American project itself has been shaken. The only serious answer to this challenge is to believe again that being Jewish is the most important thing in the world.
When we're kicked out of America and America, the whole thing is done, the whole American Jewish project is done, we're gonna be fine.
For decades, American society allowed Jews to live normal lives. This was a pleasant holiday from our destiny. The holiday is over.
The Western culture that stands against the Jews is going down. The West will survive only if it decides to love itself and if it decides to love us, the Jewish people.
The Jewish people are not normal. We never really were.
And now that Israel has turned the entire geopolitical situation on its head, our job in the diaspora is to leverage those wins and win here. Do to our enemies here what Israel did to its enemies there.
And to the world, I say this: history will not remember those who merely denounced hatred in polite language. History will remember those who acted.
This is a small bunch of wannabe Nazis. That's what they are.
Anti-Semitism is pure evil.
If we have to hunt you down the way they hunted down Nazis for decades, we will find your identities, we will find you, we will achieve justice.
I think we're at the cusp of a new age. because I think that we will achieve the expansion of peace. I think that we are in a new age because I think that the possibilities of technology, with their risks, especially in AI, but with their positive benefits, are enormous in every field. I mean, from agriculture to health to transportation and I think that we are together. We can lead this and become not a secondary power, but a primary power.
Yeah, that's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. They're not mincing words. They're not even trying to hide it and just saying the quiet part out loud. That if you are critical of Israel, if you don't believe that that their ambitions are good for your nation and your people, then they're going to hunt you down. They're going to expose your identity, make it to where you are unemployable, make it to where you can't find a spouse. The language that they use in that video that you compiled, Harrison, is, I think a lot of people will view that and they'll be afraid. It doesn't make me afraid. It makes me angry. It makes me really angry. That's wicked. It's absolutely wicked. It's been said before, and I'll say it now. They don't want to kill you because you're a Nazi. They call you a Nazi so that it will be okay to kill you. The irony is so thick you could choke, right? They'll bring up all the historical examples or even make some of them out of thin air of, Nazis, trying to dehumanize Jewish people so that it would be morally, acceptable in order to kill them. And that's exactly what they're doing to us. That's what they're doing now. They're saying, hey, you're critical of Israel, or you don't like usury and you've been talking about it a little bit too much, or you don't like, pornography and OnlyFans and all these different things. Hey, the fact that, Gen Z will never be able to own a home, or the fact that there's limitless immigration, the fact that all these different things that we have been intricately involved in making happen, not in our country, but in yours, you're speaking out against it. You have a problem with it. And therefore that immediately correlates you to Nazis, and we're going to call you that to do the very thing that we have claimed to be upset about all along. In other words, we're going to dehumanize you so that you're on the menu now. You're on the chopping block now. So that the things that we're going to do to you, the inhumane things, the way that we're going to silence you, crush you, destroy you, that's the language. Those are the words that were used in that compilation. All of it will be morally permissible. All of it will be justifiable because you're not really human. You are a Nazi scum because you had the audacity to care about your country more than ours. I'm disgusted by that. I find that, I'm angry about that. And especially right there at the end, that last segment when Netanyahu comes on and basically, he's not just saying this is what we'll do, but he's giving his reason. I think of the scripture, always be prepared in season and out of season to give a reason for the hope in which you have. Well, he has hope. He has hope that his nation will be the supreme world power, that everyone else will be subject ultimately to him, to his people, to his country. And he has a hope for, or a reason for that hope that he expresses. And the reason is technological innovation. The reason is AI. The reason is the eighth front warfare. He believes that through all this technological power, that they will be able to identify and suppress and isolate and render completely impotent anyone and everyone who says a single negative thing. Harrison, what is your take on that? And are you, I guess my question would be, in light of what we just watched, do you have any hope? Are you bullish at all on the American people? Can we win?
Absolutely. I mean, that video, I'm not sure how many views it has now. I think last time I checked, it was almost 8 million views. And I did that for free over a weekend. So it gives me a lot of hope to know that these people have literally tens of billions of dollars and 40 PhDs on staff and entire, A/B testing laboratories where there's, but they don't have the truth. So they're building everything on a foundation of sand. So we have the truth. It overwhelms all of their money, all of their conniving, all of their big positions, especially with something like X that can actually let the video go viral. hasn't gone viral on YouTube, hasn't gone viral on Instagram, did go viral on X and is now spreading to those other platforms. But part of their entire strategy is demoralization. That's why I tried to very carefully craft that, not to make it a celebration of what they're talking about, because it's evil and sick, but they're bragging about how powerful they are and how, capable they are of destroying people, which it's like, yeah, you are powerful, but you're evil. Like, that's not a good thing. And when people see you sort of reveling in the power that you have to punish your enemies, even though they haven't done anything wrong, then I think it becomes clear like what the intent of all of that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a couple aspects to it that are like building blocks that are being established. And one of the important ones I don't actually have explicitly in there, but it's the IHRA, International Holocaust Remembrance Association, working definition of anti-Semitism, which they'll adopt that. Big tech companies will adopt it, or like our government has now adopted and said, this is now how we're defining anti-Semitism. And the key component of that is anti-Israel is anti-Semitism. And so, again, I put it in a couple times. So like about every 2 minutes in that video, you hear somebody say, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, because that's a key component. Because then whatever Israel does, whatever backlash to Israel's insane and genocidal actions is therefore categorized as anti-Semitism. Those numbers go up, ADL gets more power, you cause more fear in the Jewish community, so they look to you for protection. I mean, it's a lot of it is built off that definition alone. The definition of anti-Semitism being anti-Israel, that needs to be rejected outright.
Yes, absolutely. Weston Antonio, any thoughts?
We underestimate the power of censoring someone on social media. It's like, oh, your video doesn't reach as many people. Whole ideas and people themselves, people with something to say. When you have the power and the levers over social media, you can truly make them disappear. They're still making content, they're still putting out videos, but you can truly take an idea in a way you couldn't do with someone unless you killed them in the public square, for instance. So back in the day, you would have literally had to go out and like, I'm going to have to murder this guy in his sleep. I'm going to have to murder him in the town square. If I want him silenced, I have to take real kinetic action. But in a world where ideas spread via the internet, if you take someone and you have the power over a platform like TikTok, over a platform like YouTube, over a platform, say, like Patreon, and you're trying to get a message out, it is truly possible that you are literally unable to do so. And I mean, for 20 years, we were talking about this, Harrison, during the break. I mean, there were entire decades where even beginning to question the things that we're questioning now, even beginning to posit the ideas, name the names, bring the receipts that we're doing right now. There were whole decades where doing that, whether from the ADL, the SPLC, they would get you kicked off of the internet. That's happened before, and it happened for a long time, and it got us, in some measure, to the hellhole we're in right now. And so we have this narrow window. Elon Musk buying X being a big one so ideas can spread. Alternative platforms like Rumble, creators being brave. We have a narrow window, but what you heard was them saying, we've got to close this window as fast as we can. And if we don't, we know what the end result will be. And so it's basically an arms race. Which one wins first? The message or the mechanism to suppress it? And that is a very powerful way of doing so in a media world. You can suppress someone, you can send them to the black hole of the internet, and their idea truly doesn't get out. You think about them like, oh, I used to watch their videos. Where did they go? Oh, they're gone. You can't find them. It won't pop up in your feed. It won't be suggested to you. That's something worth taking very, very seriously.
And sorry, just to note that, you hear the guy in there, we have to destroy the First Amendment in order to protect it, restrict the First Amendment in order to protect it. The First Amendment has 5 freedoms that are at play. Like, that's what they're attacking right now. Often, anti-Semitism laws against anti-Semitism are framed as we have to protect freedom of religion. So that is literally the opposite. If I have freedom of religion, I have freedom to not believe a religion. I have freedom to criticize a religion or the people in that religion or the power structure of that religion. The freedom of religion is the ability to criticize religions, not just adhere to them. So like that, I think, is an important point, how they invert the First Amendment. But then also in the First Amendment, they have the freedom of the press. At the time it was written, the press wasn't some sort of, metaphysical, newspapers and TV shows. It was a machine called the press. So like if that was written today, it would be freedom of the internet, freedom of mass communication. The press was simply the tool necessary for mass communication. So when you're talking about back in the day, they would have had to go kill somebody. That's because you can't control all of the presses, right? If somebody can just go make a press of their own, and you'd have to go conquer that too in order to stop them. So freedom of these platforms, freedom of usage of the internet, I think, is guaranteed by our First Amendment. We just haven't updated the vocabulary. We think of press as this, the news media. That's not what it means. It means the mechanical, technological ability to mass produce information.
And we have to grapple with the first word of the First Amendment is Congress. And then that does extend to state level governments, but it's Congress can't limit these. But what do you do when YouTube is so big that that is the place where 90% of people every single day, they get news and information? Well, YouTube's a private company. YouTube isn't Congress. So can they do that? Is Google, Google doesn't have to let you use their email. Google doesn't necessarily have to let you use their services. We need to think about what that means in the 21st century, not just limiting it to Congress, but saying, hey, also private companies have a responsibility potentially, and a responsibility, maybe somewhat like the First Amendment. Hey, you cannot, if you are literally the monopoly on news, you can't also censor this too. You also have a certain freedom that you have to allow to take place.
Yeah, this is that whole Section 230 controversy around having the immunity and being treated like a neutral site, if you will, but being able to actually censor people. Like there's a clear conflict of interest, contradiction there that happens with these big platforms, and that's something that has to be solved. One other thing I wanted to talk about was maybe a point of optimism. If we think about Gen Z, younger generations, I think they're fundamentally motivated by, at least politically speaking, a distrust in institutions. And so what I find kind of ironic is we watch that video and they're talking about all of this top-down leverage. One reason I just think it, outside of just blatant censorship and restriction of the First Amendment, one reason I don't think it will work is because the people they're trying to indoctrinate, if you will, or educate, as they might say, they don't even trust those. They're naturally skeptical of a blue square ad. Right. They find it off-putting. They find it on the nose. This is one of the reasons that my generation, Gen Z, everything's mimetic. Everything's 7 layers deep because no one really believes in truth. Right. No one trusts top-down information. And so the scheme, and I think they recognize this, and this is where TikTok comes in. The scheme is that algorithmically speaking, Gen Z receives their news bottoms up. It's a TikTok video made by someone in their living room that goes viral because it actually resonates, it connects, it's real. Yep. And they recognize it. They say, oh, for the last 50 years, or maybe it's less than that, maybe it's 30 years, we've controlled the institutions top down. And that's been great because we've had Fox News and we've had CNN and MSNBC. But what do we do now when everything's algorithmic, everything's bottoms up, everything's organic, if you will? That requires such a mass amount of information, and you can imagine so many people on the ground that have to post, and it has to be a swell of resources that they just fundamentally don't have access to. And this is why censorship will become so important for them in this strategy, this eighth front, if you will, because they don't have the resources to actually combat truth on the ground.
Especially AI. AI is like their number one thing. Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Could not agree more.
Harrison, any final thoughts?
No, this has been great. This has been very fun. I just think please share that video around. I'm so gratified and happy about how well the video is doing. I work a lot. I work very hard on a lot of videos, and a lot of times they don't go anywhere. So I'm so thankful for everybody who has spread it around and sent it around. And I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think it's really a really good piece of positive propaganda because it's their words. You can't, people are going, just Danny Smith. It's like, it's literally all them. You cannot claim that it's anything except for a presentation of reality. I mean, I may have put it in an order that puts across an idea I intend, not the speaker, but regardless, you can't frame this as anything other than the world Jewish elite describing their own plans and motivations. So please share it.
Yep. Thanks for coming on the show. Well said. In the vein of, publishers that are, canceling people and suppressing certain things, Wes, you mentioned kind of tongue in cheek, a little twinkle in your eye, very briefly, Patreon. For our listeners, it is worth noting, if you're not aware, we were canceled off of Patreon and we were given 0 warning. We lasted on Patreon for the time that we started, and the time that we were booted was about a week and a half, about 10 days. We got 0 warning. They didn't even tell us initially what it was. We had to follow up, in what ways did we breach your terms of service? They told us in general that it was hate speech, and then they finally gave us specification, and predominantly came down to one particular episode, which was, the title was Understanding World Jewry. And it was an episode between myself and Nicholas Fuentes. We had him live in the studio, and we did an hour-long episode on Understanding World Jewry. And we gave all the disclaimers, we gave the nuances, we were careful in our speech. We did not say every single Jew is involved in this, but there is something to be said at the elite level when it comes to billionaires and politicians and those who are, influencers and have power and influence and affluence, who are Jewish, racially Jewish, ethnically Jewish, that there is a certain way in which the world works. And we explained that. And because of that episode, Patreon, they eventually got back to us and gave us their reasoning. They said, yeah, that episode, Understanding World Jewry, is the reason why we kicked you off. In less than 10 days, we had accrued over 3,400 Patreon members. And so we had over 3,400 Patreon members that had hopped on to see this 10-part series between myself and Nicholas Fuentes. That one episode is just one of 10 parts, Understanding World Jewry. If you want to see all 10 parts, because we're no longer on Patreon, you can do so by going to members.nxrstudios.com. Again, that's members.nxrstudios.com. We have all 10 of these episodes ad-free available right there. And as a benefit to the listener, although Patreon cost us a lot of revenue, we don't want to take that out on you. And so we're not just doubling down, but we're actually tripling down by making the content still available on our own platform, but this time available for free. So every single person who goes and signs up for a membership at members.nxrstudios.com, you can get your first month trial for absolutely free. If you want to cancel, there's no hard feelings on our part, but you can watch all 10 of these episodes between myself and Nicholas J. Fuentes, and one of the topics being Understanding World Jewry. We encourage you to go and check it out. All right, that's it for the episode. We thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, click the bell on YouTube and also on Rumble, and you can follow me at Joel Webbin on X. Thanks for tuning in. Last month, we were canceled by Patreon without warning. And so we're finished working with third-party providers that ultimately hate us, our values, and you, the listener. So instead, head on over to NXR Plus. You can find it at members.nxrstudios.com. There you'll find the 10-part series that we did with Nicholas J. Fuentes. You'll also find special interviews with guys like Jared Taylor and Dr. Kevin McDonald. You'll also find a host of new content that we're actively producing and working on right now. The next multiple-part series with a special guest that you'll love is well underway, and in a matter of weeks, it will all be available in its entirety for you to binge watch ad-free. And the best news is that the first month is on us. You can get a free month subscription by heading over to members.nxrstudios.com. Do it now.